What Joe wanted me to talk about is what happens after an emergency. What actually happens after we do an exercise or a drill or something we call the tabletop. And that's called an after-action report. And it essentially is a group of individuals, and we'll talk all about this, the individuals who were involved in the emergency disaster exercise, or the stakeholders, and we're stakeholders, you as a citizen, others as business owners who can get impacted by what the occurrence was. So we have to have a little idea what happens after it's all over again. So to do that, we should have a basic understanding is what happens when a disaster occurs. Well, we have our first responders. And we all realize here on West Mile, we have limited first responders. Even if we had a lot, we only have one road going each way, and we can very easily be isolated. And then we have our mayor, our executives, our county executives. After that, okay, we have the governor, and then it goes into a federal response. So as you can see, all disasters, they start at the local level, and they actually end at the local level. So when things happen, and we have survived the disaster, we need to look at all the things that went right and all the things that went wrong. We try to make sure that it doesn't happen a second time. So we look at things like hazmat calls, terrorist bombing in London, and then we look at the fact that Maui had the brush fires, and now, maybe because of global warming or not, and we're not going to get into the politics of global warming, but things are happening that never happened before. In fact, in Maui, we had a hurricane that actually went over the island twice. You don't have to have tremendous winds and rain to have a serious consequences of events related to a hurricane, which we had here. We had the brush fires. So we look at what's changing all over the world. And so what we do after the events, we put out what is called an after-action report. And it's something that is highly suggested by FEMA and the Department of Homeland Security. And all it is you pulling together all of the information from everybody who worked the incident, the staff, the departments, any that participated in the response, the incident or exercise, and then they do a final report. And this is actually the final report that you can look on online from the Las Vegas shooting that happened. And then we try to make changes, and we'll talk about those changes. We'll see if this kicks off over here.
Report actually gives a minute-by-minute account of what happened the night of 1 October. It describes the different challenges faced by officers the night of the shooting. It details 93 recommendations, and Metro says nearly half of those are already in place. Some of the biggest areas for concern included communication. Nearly 1,500 officers worked that night. The report says hundreds of radio calls by officers were denied because other officers were already speaking. Metro says it's implementing a radio repeater to boost signal so SWAT team radios can have access inside hotels. The report also recommends establishing staging areas, protocol on how to manage and deploy working employees, and stricter policies on self-deployment of off-duty first responders. Metro is also increasing the availability of equipment, particularly rifles and trauma kits. While the department says it trains its officers for an active shooter, there was little training on how to handle the aftermath. In a major incident, a Metro officer will now have a detailed protocol, and is going to invest in a computer system that will deploy employees with instructions.
So to kind of give you an idea of exactly what this means, so if we look at the Las Vegas shooting and we look at Sandy Hook, the shooting in the school, we actually have changed the way we respond right now as first responders. Before, the officers would get on the scene, they would get together in a group of 4 to 6 officers, they would make entry and try to apprehend the shooter. We just lost too many children in Sandy Hook who bled out because the paramedics couldn't get to them. So now what we teach, as soon as the officers arrive on the scene, they make entry, and their sole job is to apprehend and take down the shooter. But once that shooter is pushed back in the building or apprehended, so that shooter does not have a clean line of sight, paramedics come in, SWAT paramedics, they come in and they do their life-saving techniques and pull the victims out. So we actually don't wait anymore until the shooter is taken down. As soon as there is not a line of sight, trained paramedics now go in and they actually treat the victims, because we just lost too many kids in Sandy Hook. And then the Las Vegas shooting, we looked at the hospitals, found out that the victims weren't being brought to them by EMS. They were arriving at the hospitals in any way they can. Private citizens were getting to the hospitals. So the Department of Homeland Security and FEMA at the Center for Domestic Preparedness, which basically is the First Responder Training Academy, is one of the places I teach for FEMA. They're setting up a new course the first of the year. It's called the DREAM Course. And what it is, it's going to train clinicians how to respond and what to expect in a major terrorist or shooting event, to prepare the hospitals when the influx of victims actually get to them before EMS brings them. And all of this came out of action after reports from the incidents that we have had here in the United States and also the world. So after a disaster, we look at everybody gets together with the purpose of identifying improvements that can be policies, procedures, or actions. You discuss all of the related activities that took place, and you try to improve the planning, the mitigation, the response, and the recovery from lessons learned based on the event. And one of the things that we're going to find out, it allows us to work together and strengthen the community. Also, we learned by corrective actions. What was our problems? A lack of communications. We always have a lack of communication. Because once the cell towers go down, or if we lose landlines, and what we're doing in the mainland now is we're taking landlines out of the house. It's going digital, or you're going cell phones. So if that system goes down, we have a lack of communication as a private citizen. So we look at how can we improve this? So we look at the event-related activities. What actually took place? So we try to return the community to a pre-event status. Well, how do we do that? Now the county has things like CERT teams set up. What Joe and I have been trying to do through the HEART program is trying to look at all of the individuals who live on West Maui, okay, or the fire and the police and the EMS who have retired from community service, and how could they be utilized as a second group of individuals, sort of like the community emergency response team. But here we have individuals who have done their 30, 40 years, and a fireman engineer who pumped an apparatus for 20 years. I don't care if he or she's retired for 10 years, they can still pump an engine. A paramedic can still do life-saving techniques. An EMT always has their skills. But we're trying to find a way of getting this community together and trying to utilize these highly trained individuals who have retired. And so far, we have not found a place that will accept us. We try to return organizations to the pre-event status. We try to document everything we can. We try to complete all of the state and federal reportings, because if you don't get your paperwork completed correctly, there's a good chance you're not going to receive your FEMA funding. Because just because there's a disaster, you're actually better off if all of the disaster damage is in one spot than periodic spots, because of the way FEMA looks at disaster reporting. So we look at what do we need to improve before the next event. We have response professionals who play an incredible role. Our fire, police, our guys and our gal responders, they put their lives on the line for us. but there should be a way we can help them. If not right during the emergency, right after the emergency. So we can do that by looking, what were the deficiencies? Through further planning, can we help the response or the recovery operations? I'm not going to go through this video because it's about 7 or 8 minutes, but there are literally 7 schools through FEMA that offers 100% grant funding for our first responders, fire, police, EMS, hospital. The only thing they don't pay is overtime or backfill. But they'll pay to get to the airport in Kahului, fly them to Alabama, and they'll get them back to their doors at absolutely no cost. But again, they don't pay for backfill, and they do not pay for overtime. That has to be picked up by the community. But all of this training in all of these different consortium schools are all 100% grant funded. They even have courses for executives and senior officials to understand how they would operate during an emergency in a command post or an emergency operations center. We have to understand why we have something like the incident management system. It's a system that we utilize in the United States, so we all kind of do the same things the same way, and when you go to their training classes, everybody is taught exactly the same way. So a responder or a incident commander here in Maui has been taught the exact same classes that the incident commander would have been taught in Los Angeles. In fact, a lot of the section chiefs from the islands here actually go to the West Coast during wildlife fires to get experience, a practical experience, actually working in a management role during a disaster. So what we try to do in the after action report is review what our objectives were. A summary of what happened and why. Why did we evacuate? Why didn't we evacuate? What did we forget to do? So then we review of how actual action different. Well, this was in our emergency plea plan, but maybe this is the way we did it. But why? Well, we only had 3 responders instead of 6. So we had to kind of modify our plan a little bit. We try to analyze whether the outcome differed from the plan results for any given factors. We try to identify what went well and what didn't go well and what needs improvement. Okay, we look at what are our future training needs. And we may be looking at FEMA DHS and see what they can give for us. They actually bring courses out to the islands if there's grant money. And then we look at the summary of proposed recommendations. But it's important that during this after action report, when the stakeholders and the response and the management get together, at no time do we ever get into a situation where we try to put blame on somebody. Because during an emergency situation, it's pretty tough to handle everything that's going on at the same time, because the emergency doesn't go by a playbook. So we have to adapt as emergency managers. So we go through the process, but we never assume blame. So that gives us the opportunity to be able to talk freely. What do you think about this? What could we have done better? So placing blame is not an option. At no time do we ever bring that up. It's like the word you never mention. This process is to figure out what we did wrong, what we did good, and how we can improve it before the next disaster occurs. There is just too much to be learned in anything for anybody to worry about placing blame at that time. So you may want to include only the agencies that were directly involved. That's an option for an action after report. This way everybody kind of discusses, well, this is what was actually going on, boots on the ground. Maybe the management and the command post, maybe they got just a little bit different view of what was really going on. Sometimes other agencies get involved and they put their impact through. So we look at our mission areas. We try to prevent, we try to protect, we mitigate, We have our direct response, and then we have our recovery. And that's the area, I think, and Joe thinks, that the expertise here on West Maui is just incredible. We've got retired doctors, we've got retired nurses, paramedics, firemen, policemen, who have spent 30 years helping their communities. And during a disaster, I know they would want to help. And we have suggested ways to bring them together. But so far, we have not found a home. And we need a home. We want to help. That's all we want to do, is we want to use the expertise that's on West Maui, especially from our retirees. And how could we benefit our community during a disaster situation? So we look at an review of performance. We evaluate performance. We try to make sure we understand what we can actually do with the capabilities that we have here, which are limited based on other geographical locations in the United States. We try to take our lessons learned. What do we have to do? New training? Do we have to review our plans and procedures? Is there a way we can upgrade to improve? Okay? And then what really worked good and how we can benefit from that. We looked at, did we have a problem that we had too many people in one area because we didn't demobilize and move them to another area? Did that not occur because of a communication problem? What are our resources? It's pretty tough on West Maui if we need more stuff to get on the phone to Emergency Operations Center and say, hey, we need more stuff, because where are we going to get it from? Especially if the road's out. We look at our communication needs. And I know Joe has done a lot with the ham operators. And during an emergency, when everything else goes down, those are going to be the individuals that we're going to have to rely on. And we need to get them in as part of our operational plan. We look at our priorities. We look at our critical tasks. We look at the fact that how many people, how many guests do we have on West Maui at any time? If a hurricane's coming and they shut the airports, where are they going to go? They're going to be here. How many ambulances do we have on West Maui? How many ambulances do we have in West Maui when the roads are taken out? But do we have retired EMTs and paramedics? Is there a way we could utilize them in an emergency situation? And the first thing they're going to bring up, and this was the first thing that Joe and I got into a year and a half ago. The reason we need to be adopted by somebody because we need to be protected for liability at that point. Somebody has to say, you're part of us. And that's the identification of legal and liability concerns. That has to happen. So we look at the after-action report, recommendations that should be shared with everybody, identification of anybody that wants to help, future training plans, short and long-term goals, a timetable to implement our strategy, a follow-up, assignments, and then we need to document. So we look what has already happened during the missile crisis here. Things were changed very quickly. Procedures were put in place so that wouldn't happen again. So recommendations were made. And they were, because the first responders I have talked to that have gone through my classes for Homeland Security said, okay, these things have taken place. So it's a lessons learned. And that's what we do for an action after report. We learn by our mistakes. We look at what's our biggest concern here? Are there alternate solutions to our problems? What recommendations do we need? But we don't want to stay stagnant. Even FEMA in 2017, which had a really bad year for hurricane response, put out a really, really good after-action report. And anybody can look at that. It's online. All you got to do is Google 2017 FEMA hurricane season after-action report. And it's online, and you can read it. We look at During that time, the capabilities of FEMA were actually stressed. So future responses have to take account of this. So we actually have a format for our action after reports. We look at what we tried to accomplish. FEMA looks at their failures. That's part of an after action report. We don't assume blame. We say, this didn't go exactly correct, so let's try to make it better. This is what we have to do. But we don't stay stagnant. We realize prevention is the best. Let's prevent things from happening. If they do, what are our response capabilities? And once that hurricane has moved on, or that tsunami, then what do we need to bring back our community to the status it had before the disaster happened? So we look at prevention. We look at routes of evacuations. Did the evacuations go good? Did they go bad? What do we need to protect, make it better next time? How do we reduce the potential of loss of life? We try to analyze risk. We need to take action now before the next disaster. And we don't stay stagnant. Forecasting. Let's be really realistic here. We already had our first Category 6 hurricane. We've never had a hurricane go directly over Maui, and it has, correct?
Tropical storm.
Probably?
Tropical storm.
Well, okay. Still caused a disaster. You don't have to have it be called a hurricane to have potential outcomes. But the point is, things are happening that never happened before. The 100-year flood is happening every 20 years. If you look at the breakdown of your Category 5s, okay, they say 157 or higher. If you look at some of the scales, they end at 174. So technically, we had a hurricane Class 6. So things are changing. Why? It may be global warming. That's not for us in the emergency services. We need to prepare for those outcomes. We need to prepare our citizens what they can do. Do they know how to shut off their gas? Do they have their go bags? Can they be self-sufficient for 14 days if something happens out here? So we look at what is necessary for recovery. How quickly are we going to get supplies here? If the supplies get here, who is going to administer them to make sure the population gets them? How many 100,000 bottles of water did they find in Puerto Rico after the disaster? Over 500,000 bottles of water on a runway that was dropped off and somehow never got administered to the population. Probably a communication. So how do we fix that? How do we get that stuff in here if something happens? I don't have all the answers. All we want to do is try to help. So we look at our areas of improvement. Okay? How do we change that? Can we have a responsible party that does it? Okay? Do we have a completion date on our after action report items? Okay? And then we have a status update. Nothing is ever going to get done 100% correctly at the time we want it to. But if we make steady progress with the limitations we have, at least we're going in the right direction. And to help us do that is the after action reports. It basically tells us our strengths. It gives us an idea where our areas of improvement need to be. It makes recommendations so we can get there. And then we have our conclusion and our next steps. How do we get there? Do we need to go in little steps? We can, we can only accomplish what we can with the limited resources that we have. So we have to be realistic in our goal setting. So the after action report process is an excellent tool that creates opportunity for change and community endurance. It's a guideline for us. 4 major parts: planning, prep, the AAR, and then we have our follow-through. And that follow-through impacts not only the community, it also impacts the state. So we look at, if something happens, we have an exercise, we have a disaster, we can only react based on what the capabilities that we have, our core capabilities, what our limited resources are. We look at it, we write up the report, we review the report, and with what we have, our goal is just to be better next time.